Ready for a deep dive. Today we're going to explore what happens when the brain, the thing that makes us, goes a little haywire.
Yeah, and we've got a great guide for this journey. It's a book called My Stroke of Insight, written by, get this, a brain scientist.
The brain scientist who had a stroke.
Exactly, Jill Bolte. She had a severe left hemisphere stroke, and as a neuroscientist, she was super aware of what was happening as her reality was changing.
So she had a front row seat, and she took notes. Talk about dedication to the craft.
Seriously. But before we get to the stroke itself, Jill talks a lot about her life before, and, well, she was already fascinated by the brain.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, she's a brain scientist.
Totally. But there was a personal connection, too. Her brother had schizophrenia.
So that fueled her passion to understand, the complexities of the brain, why it sometimes just, goes wrong.
Definitely. And at the time of the stroke, Jill was at Harvard, a real high achiever. But she was also known as the singing scientist. She was a big advocate for mental health.
Traveled the country, I hear.
Yep. She was living a pretty vibrant life, driven by this passion for, well, the very organ that, would soon betray her.
And then, boom, a hemorrhagic stroke. A blood vessel in her brain bursts. As her left hemisphere starts to shut down, she experiences all these neurological disruptions. I mean, she loses language, motor skills.
She even loses the ability to recognize her own body.
It's crazy.
What's remarkable is that, because of her background, she's watching this happen. She's observing her own mind coming undone.
That's got to be terrifying.
Totally. But there's also this strange beauty to it. Jill describes this peace and euphoria as her left brain goes quiet. Like this merging with her surroundings, her sense of self just dissolves.
So the question is, if our sense of self, language, all those analytical abilities, if those are mostly left brain functions, what happens when that part goes silent?
Right. What kind of consciousness emerges?
And Jill calls this right brain consciousness. It's marked by a heightened sense of presence, connection, oneness with the universe.
This idea of right brain consciousness, that's really at the core of her story. Like, what if there are other ways of experiencing reality, ways that go beyond our usual left brain dominant mode?
It's like we've got two operating systems, and we're always stuck on the left brain one, the logic, language, analysis.
She wants us to ask, what if we could tap into the right brain's potential, the peace, the intuition?
So let's break this down. Jill describes the left brain as detail-oriented, analytical, obsessed with language and logic. The part of us that creates our sense of self, keeps us on a schedule.
But during the stroke, as those left brain functions are deteriorating, Jill struggles with even simple things, like recognizing numbers, even the idea of calling for help. She couldn't figure out how to dial 911.
Wow, we really do take so much for granted.
Oh, absolutely. But while the left brain is struggling, the right brain, which is usually kind of in the background, it takes center stage. Jill describes it as this world of intuition, sensory experience, interconnectedness.
She loses her sense of boundaries, right? Feels like she's merging with everything around her.
Totally. She goes from an analytical mind to a purely experiential one. And it makes you wonder, what if some of the qualities we think of as impairments, like that loss of ego, what if those actually offer a valuable perspective?
It's amazing how a neurological crisis can turn into this exploration of consciousness. And even in all this chaos, Jill manages to come up with a plan to get help.
She uses what little cognitive ability she has left, plus her knowledge of the brain, to navigate this terrifying situation. She couldn't remember her work phone number, but she could picture the keypad. So she dials the numbers slowly, matching the image in her mind to the buttons.
Like she's MacGyvering her own brain.
Right. But her condition keeps getting worse. As the hemorrhage grows, she loses language comprehension completely. People are talking, but she can't understand a word.
It'd be like being in a foreign country where you don't know the language.
Exactly. And that isolation must have been profound. But even then, she still describes this overwhelming sense of peace.
She calls it the la-la land of her right brain.
A place where her ego dissolves, and she feels connected to the universe.
It just seems paradoxical, right? That a devastating event could lead to such peace.
It really makes you question what we consider healthy or normal.
Definitely. Are we missing out on something by being so rooted in our left brain world?
Jill's experience really opens up this whole new way of thinking about the brain. It's like she stumbles onto a secret path in her mind, a doorway to a different way of experiencing reality.
And finally, she gets to Massachusetts General, The doctors confirm it's a severe stroke, rush her into emergency surgery. It's a life or death situation.
As she's drifting in and out of consciousness, she's reflecting on all these profound insights.
And she realizes that everything she thought she knew about herself, her perception of reality, it was all just a construct of her brain.
It's humbling, but also liberating.
Yeah. So if our brains can shape our reality that much, what does it mean for our potential to change, to heal?
And right before surgery, she makes this conscious decision to surrender, to embrace whatever comes next.
That's a powerful moment.
Absolutely. And thankfully, the surgery is a success. Her journey to recovery begins. But that's a story for part 2 of our deep dive.
We'll be back to explore the amazing resilience of the brain, and we'll follow Jill as she fights her way back to, well, wholeness.
It's a story that'll challenge everything you thought you knew about what the brain can do. And it just might inspire you to see the potential for healing and transformation that's in all of us.
So Jill makes it through surgery. That's a big win. But now she's got a whole new mountain to climb, right?
Absolutely. It's like starting from scratch, relearning how to walk, talk, all those basic things we take for granted.
It's one thing to know about the brain, but to experience that kind of rewiring firsthand, that's got to be intense.
And Jill talks about how her mom, Gigi, was just incredible during this time.
A real rock, huh?
Totally. And Gigi's approach was really interesting. It wasn't about rushing Jill back to her old life. It was about meeting her where she was at, you know?
Yeah. Starting with the basics.
Exactly. And I think that's so important. Because imagine you have this awareness of your former abilities, but you just can't access them. That's gotta be frustrating.
Beyond frustrating, I'd say.
And Jill describes this really well, like with putting a puzzle together, something most of us do without even thinking. She had to relearn what an edge was, what right side up meant.
It's like having all the pieces but no idea how they fit together.
And that makes her recovery even more impressive. She had to find new ways to access information, new pathways in her brain.
But Gigi was smart. She knew it wasn't just about practical skills. She brought Jill's passions into the recovery, took her to her art studio, her music room.
Like reigniting those parts of her identity, that's so key for healing.
Makes you wonder if we all need a Gigi in our lives, huh? Someone who sees our potential even when we don't.
For sure. And then there's reading. Imagine looking at a page and seeing just a jumble of symbols. Jill had to relearn the alphabet, how to sound out words.
You know, it's like teaching a kid to read. That takes so much patience.
It really does. And it shows you the power of the brain to rewire itself, to adapt.
Jill also talks about how exhausting it was just to pay attention, like trying to hear a phone call with bad reception. You're straining to catch every word.
Yeah, I get that. And for anyone supporting a stroke survivor, that's something to remember. Patience is everything.
And recovery, well, it's not a straight line. Jill had setbacks, moments of despair, but then, boom, these breakthroughs that kept her going.
Like she regained speech, but then it was the words themselves. She knew what she wanted to say, but couldn't find the right words.
She gives an example. She knew the concept of president in the United States, but couldn't remember Bill Clinton.
Exactly. The information was in there, but she couldn't access it.
And she talks about medication, how it dulled her senses, made her question if being normal was worth it.
That's a good point, right? What are we willing to sacrifice for normalcy?
And Jill had Gigi there, fighting for her, believing in her.
Gigi created this environment of safety and encouragement, which is so crucial.
Recovery isn't just about medicine. It's about having that support system.
And as Jill got stronger, Gigi pushed her to go out, test her limits.
And one of those tests was presenting at a conference. Can you imagine?
To prepare, Jill used videos of herself pre-stroke. Like she was coaching herself back to her old abilities.
That's pretty clever.
And it worked. She gave the presentation, started to see a path back to her work.
What a fighter.
But there were still challenges, of course. Driving, math, the fatigue.
Yeah, brain injury takes a toll.
But she never lost that self-awareness. She was always observing, analyzing her progress.
And she talks about these small victories, like being able to climb stairs 2 at a time.
It's a good reminder for all of us, right? Celebrate those little wins.
It's about the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly. And Jill's story isn't just about physical recovery. It's about discovering those hidden strengths we all have.
So much to unpack there. All right, so we've heard about Jill's stroke, the tough recovery, and her amazing comeback. But the later parts of the book, that's where things get really thought-provoking.
It's like she goes from patient to, like, I don't know, a wise teacher or something.
Yeah, sharing all these lessons she's learned about the brain. And one of the things that stuck with me was this 90-second rule.
Ah, yes.
I've heard of it, but honestly, I need a refresher. What's the deal with those 90
Okay,
seconds?
so basically the idea is that our emotional circuits, they have a natural peak and then they subside
Right.
within about 90 seconds.
So, like when you get hit with anger, sadness, whatever, it's a wave that rises and falls.
Right. But here's the thing. Our left brain, it loves to hold on.
Oh, yeah. Overthinking, analyzing.
Exactly. It wants to figure out why we're feeling this way, who's to blame, how to stop it from happening again.
I mean, I'm making it worse.
Totally. We get stuck in the story.
But Jill's point is we have these 90 seconds to choose how we react. If we can just observe the feeling without getting swept away by the thoughts, it fades away on its own.
Exactly. Like imagine you're stewing over something that happened.
Oh, I do that all the time.
What if instead of replaying it over and over, you just acknowledge the feeling? You say, okay, I'm angry, but this will pass.
It's almost like giving yourself permission to feel it, but knowing it's not permanent.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not about ignoring your emotions. It's about understanding them, not letting them control you.
And then Jill talks about this idea of tending the garden of the mind, using the right brain to cultivate peace and joy,
I love that analogy. We get to choose what we plant in our minds.
weeding out the negativity, nurturing the good stuff.
And she gives practical tips for doing this. Mindfulness, sensory awareness, gratitude.
It's like a science-backed guide to inner peace. Pretty cool.
It is.
Yeah.
Because it's all about recognizing that we have more power than we think. We can shape our thoughts and emotions.
We don't have to be at the mercy of our left brain.
Right. And Jill's story, it's such a strong reminder that even after something terrible, there's always potential for growth.
So what can we, the everyday folks who haven't had a stroke, take away from this?
Well, we all deal with stress, right? Negative thoughts, those mental loops that keep us down. Jill shows us that we have more control than we realize. We can learn to shift our perspective, to tap into that right brain piece.
Like accessing that la-la land without needing a brain injury to get there.
It's about embracing the brain's ability to change, to adapt, and recognizing that healing isn't just fixing something broken, it's about discovering new strengths.
So here we are at the end of our deep dive into Jill Bolte Taylor's incredible story. What a ride.
This book really makes you think about the brain, about resilience, about the potential we all have.
Absolutely. It's a powerful story of healing and transformation. And you know what? Maybe it's a little nudge for all of us to tend to our own gardens of the mind, to cultivate a bit more peace, joy, connection.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it insightful, maybe even inspiring. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, keep diving deep.